Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This video is a continuation of the previous video of block 1 histocytes. This is the histology of the parotid gland, which contains serous SNI. Serous SNI mostly give a basophilic stain. So that is why the parotid gland makes up 25% contribution to the saliva, and it contains maximum amylase activity. This diagram is the histology of the submaxillary gland, which is also called as the submandibular gland. The submandibular gland makes up 70% contribution to the saliva, and it has a moderate amount of amylase activity in its secretion. In this diagram, you can see some striated duct as well as some intercalated duct. This one is actually the intercalated duct with spherical nuclei, and this one should be the interlobular duct. ठीक है, इसी तरह यहाँ पे कहीं ना कहीं there must be a striated duct, जैसे ये वाली है, जिसमें क्या होता है कि there is a striated appearance of the nucleus. The submandibular gland contains the serous SNI and the mucous SNI. That is why in some areas you see an eosinophilic stain, whereas in some areas you see a basophilic stain. In this diagram, you see the sublingual gland, that is the smallest of all the salivary glands. It makes a 5% contribution to the saliva, and it mainly contains mucous SNI, and that is why it has a basophilic stain, and you can also appreciate some interlobular ducts. There are some ducts in between. This is the histological slide of the duodenum. In the up section, you can see the leaf-shaped villus. And the epithelium is of a simple columnar with some goblet cells and microvilli. The prominent feature is the presence of Brunner's glands in the submucosa. So these must be the Brunner's glands. These. Then it has got a muscularis externa, which contains inner circular and outer longitudinal. And then we've got an adventitia, which is basically connective tissue with some adipocytes and also some blood vessels. This is the histological slide of the jejunum, in which the mucosa is highly convoluted. And the mucosa is again simple columnar epithelium with microvilli and goblet cells. In between we have this lamina propria, and in the center we have this muscularis mucosae. The muscularis mucosae contains blood vessels. Beneath then we'll be having the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. So the jejunum contains serosa. Ileum also contains serosa. Only the first part of the duodenum contains adventitia. The diagram sometimes may not be well focused, so you may see a picture like this. This is the histological slide of ileum, which contains club-shaped villus. Again, that is having simple columnar epithelium, club-shaped finger-like villus. It is having simple columnar epithelium with goblet cells and microvilli. Then there is a lamina propria that contains connective tissue, blood vessels. And then there is muscularis. The prominent feature in ileum are the lymphatic nodules or the Peyer's patches, which give a basophilic stain to the ileum. Then there is submucosa. These are the Peyer's patches that I'm highlighting. Then we have the submucosa. Then there is this muscularis externa, which contains circular and the longitudinal smooth muscles. And then there is serosa, which is basically blood vessels surrounded by a layer of fine connective tissue and peritoneum. This is the picture of a human colon, and that contains mucosa, which is simple columnar epithelium, but the simple columnar epithelium is having goblet cells, and it is helping in absorption. Then there is lamina propria. Then there is muscularis mucosae, and the submucosa, it contains some lymphatic aggregations that that may be present here. And then there is a muscularis externa. ठीक है, in the muscularis externa there is a circular layer, and the longitudinal smooth muscle layer is in the form of tinea coli, and it is also surrounded by serosa. These big structures that you see here, these are basically the crypts of Leprechaun. So this is actually the point of identification. And this is the muscularis mucosae. This is also a very beautiful slide of a human colon. Localized collection of fat cells under peritoneum produce external bulges known as appendices epiploiky in the colon. This is the histological slide of the appendix. This is the lumen. The lumen is generally star-shaped, but it sometimes may not be star-shaped. Then we have the muscularis. Okay, I think I'm mistaken. This may not be the lumen. This may be some artifact. तो यहाँ पर आपके पास जो है वो हो सकता है ल्यूमिनो, ठीक है, ऑन दिस साइड ऑफ द हिस्टोलॉजिकल स्लाइड. ठीक है, तो यहाँ से आपका स्टार्ट होगा म्यूकोजा. ठीक है, जो म्यूकोजा है इसका जो लाइनिंग एपिथेलियम है दैट इज़ अगेन ऑफ कॉलमनर वेराइटी एंड इट कंटेन्स गॉबलेट सेल्स. इसके बाद देन वी हैव द लेमिना प्रोप्रिया दैट कंटेन्स इंटेस्टाइनल ग्लैंड्स, एंड देन देर इज़ some lymphatic follicles also present in the lamina propria. There is muscularis mucosae, submucosa, and the muscularis externa and serosa. This is the section of the appendix. This type of basophilic stain that you see here is mostly, this one only, is mostly for a lymphatic follicle. Now let's talk about the histological slide of the tongue, which contains conical papillae. Papillae are actually the projections that are projecting downwards. So it contains conical papillae, and it contains lingual papilla. It contains, it is basically, tongue is basically a skeletal muscle. It contains lingual glands or lingual tonsils. This is the histological diagram of a circumvallate papillae, which is dipping down like a valley. This is the histological section of the upper part of the esophagus, which contains stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. It has the thickest muscularis mucosa. It has a longitudinal mucosal fold. It contains submucosal glands, and it is of a mixed nature. It contains skeletal and smooth muscles. But in the upper section, it mainly contains smooth muscles. Okay, so in the upper section, it contains skeletal muscle. In the middle section, it's a mixture of skeletal and smooth. And in the lower part, or in the lower 1/3, it contains only smooth muscles. So this part is stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. Then lamina propria and the muscularis mucosae, and the muscularis mucosae के बाद we have got the submucosa that contains the submucosal glands, also called as esophageal glands. So one of the prominent feature is that it contains the thickest muscularis mucosae, and then from here onward starts the muscularis externa. So the mucosa, the lamina propria, the muscularis mucosae, which is the thickest one here. I think ये सारा वही है. मैंने I think इसको ऊपर label कर दिया था. This should be the muscularis mucosae. Submucosa I think ये बारीक सी layer होगी. और फिर ये सारा muscularis externa होगा. This is also another diagram of the esophagus upper region, showing stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae, and then muscularis externa. This is a histological slide showing the fundus of the stomach. The fundus of the stomach shows typical gastric pits, and those gastric pits are lined by simple columnar epithelium. It contains long tubular glands in the mucosa. It has layers of muscularis externa, but it has no submucosal glands. The surface epithelium cannot be zoomed well, but the surface epithelium contains mucosal neck cells, parietal cells, zymogenic cells, and then I'll show you another diagram. So this is a more clearer picture. I think these are actually the long tubular glands in the mucosa. These are the gastric pits, and then there are layers of muscularis externa, and there are no submucosal glands. So the prominent feature is that there are the deeper gastric pits. The gastric pits are comparatively much deeper than the fundus of the stomach, and there are longer tubular glands, and which are basically called as the pyloric glands. I suspect that these are actually the पाइलोरिक ग्लैंड्स. ठीक है, इसके अंदर ये ख़ास किस्म के पाइलोरिक ग्लैंड्स होते हैं जो कि कैरेक्टरिस्टिक होते हैं ऑफ द पाइलोरस. दीज आर एक्चुअली द branched tubular glands in the mucosa, and there are longer gastric pits. तो बस इन tubular glands से याद रखो और longer gastric pits. The last slide of block 1 histology is the cardiac end of the stomach. It's not a very important diagram, and this slide contains cardiac glands. Unlike the pyloric end of the stomach, which contains pyloric glands, this contains some glands that are not very clear in this picture as it is not very focused. So it contains pyloric glands. Sorry, cardiac glands.